Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnis Luks here at the Crossroads, and I'd like to welcome my guests from around the world. David Smith, welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
No worries, pleased to have you, David. And Robert Klinck from Canada. Welcome, Robert.
Good evening, Arnie. Good to be here.
That's it. Yes, we've done that exercise of where Canada is, where Robert lives. If I put a needle from where I live through the core of the earth and it comes out the other side, that's not far off where Robert lives. It's interesting. We're diametrically opposed. It's beautiful. And Wallace Klinck, welcome, Wallace.
Well, I'm very happy to be with you again, Arnie, and I hope that we can do justice to the great subject at hand.
No worries. Thank you for that, Walt, and the encouragement. Okay, we'll go and do a lap of the papers and just work our way through. So the big tickets for the Australian is the slowdown in the vaccination rates. And I will point out that there is an article here in regard to vaccination, and Queensland is insisting that the frontline workers, it's not actually up at the moment, Queensland Premier is insisting that the frontline medical workers will have the vaccine and they will not be able to do their job unless they do. So it really is a quite a challenging time where if you don't get a vaccine, you can't actually be employed in the health industry. So it's an encroachment. It's a development of encroachment. And I noted here that in Britain, it appears as if there are stronger and stronger numbers resisting the vaccine, and that to me is a healthy scepticism. Epoch Times, as I said before, it's dialectics. They argue, Biden and Democrats, Trump and Republicans. They don't actually look for the truth, a way out. And this, to me, is the validity of what we're doing, which of course is Douglas Social Credit, is actually looking at how things actually work and how they should be put into proper order, and then they will work more effectively. Gateway Pundit, this is a picture here of a man who had an allergic reaction to the vaccine, and so I think that in itself is important. But the main subject, in my view, for this week is the fact that in Australia, and I believe it's similar in other nations, that the levels of debt are doubling and tripling and quadrupling virtually each year. They are going logarithmically up. And of course, the level in this particular article that points it out at something like 37,000 for a newborn baby, for an adult, for a child, for any parent. Anyone who's alive in the nation is lumbered with a $37,000 debt from what the government is currently doing. That's not funny. That will bankrupt the whole nation. And the thing is that this debt isn't even owed to our own Australian banks. This is overseas debt. So that means that we've actually mortgaged our assets. And of course, what Jeremy Lee warned us about with this sort of level of indebtedness is they will debt for equity. They will take our assets in transfer of these levels of debt. So we're handing over our nation to central bankers, international central bankers. And then finally, it looks like this. There's been a big push in the Australian press, driven by some very dominant female reporters, and it seems to be causing the Conservative government in Australia to come unstuck. And this particular article is suggesting that if Rupert Murdoch, who is the owner of the major media sources in Australia, also Washington Post and things like that, and I think it's the Times in London, he's obviously a billionaire. He has massive amounts of influence over governments, and the media just jumps to him because he owns it. And so he drives things. And in this case, it may be the end of the Conservative government in Australia, in a sense, the Prime Ministership, the current Prime Ministership. And this is not unprecedented. We've had Murdoch do it before with the sacking and replacement of Malcolm Turnbull. But more importantly was the David Cameron in Britain, British Prime Minister, was replaced by Theresa May. And I made a point when that happened, when that actually occurred, that there was no party vote as to the new Prime Minister. It was a selection done by Murdoch, and the party just went along with it, and it was extraordinary. And of course, because the press didn't play the tune of actually saying the truth of the situation, people were not aware that Murdoch had gone there. He had sacked Cameron because the referenda had gone through to leave the European Union, and immediately replaced him with Theresa May. Now that sort of power, you've got to take it into account. This is what's actually going on in the world. The power of the media is inordinate, and it gets to a point, well, hang on, no one's elected him. No, they haven't. And the fact is that the government is allowing monopolies to grow further and further. And so that level of influence gets to the point where they actually subdue any other train of thought. And we experience that all the time, that we might uncover something in the press and we won't see anything happen in Australia for weeks and weeks, because the press will suppress the story. They'll kill it. They censor it. Deliberate suppression. So it really is important to take these things into account when you're attempting to decipher the actual events that are transpiring. Wallace Klinck, I'm going to actually give you the floor first, and I'm keenly interested in your thoughts.
Well, the thing of it is, money controls all things. You can't do anything without money. If you have the control of the issue of money and the cancellation of money, which the banks do by charter, they ultimately, when it comes right down to it, they have the power to control virtually all policy. That is a centralization of power that is unnatural and unjust. It is destructive because it concentrates certain policies which are held by a few powerful people and does not allow humanity to evolve in an open and free manner. So you're bound to get tyranny from this type of financial system. Our money is credit, basically. It is simply credit that is issued by the process of issuing loans, which the banks have a monopoly to do. And so it's really a tremendously insidious and evil form of tyranny, of centralized control, of dictating how society shall function, and just simply destroys the whole basis of any meaningful human life.
Thank you for that, Wally. That's an excellent opening thoughts, and it certainly places it clearly on the table. Of course, with the power of banking to credit creation, we've got to consider then the role of media, because the media, of course, is their publicity. It's their public relations. It is their societal conditioning mechanism. Your thoughts, please, David Smith.
You're spot on there. The media controls and runs the world, really. People believe what they see on the media. Except that is coming unraveled, and as we see today, there's more and more people questioning the vaccines. There's more and more people questioning what goes on in Parliament, and there's more and more people looking for other sources to rely on for their information. And the vaccine issue still comes out to the fore, because there's not a word coming over of the side effects of these untested, I don't like calling them vaccines. They're chemical cocktails, and the public at large are going to see them and hear about them firsthand rather than through the media. And that is angering people, I believe. So in the very essence of what they're trying to control, they're setting the seeds of their own downfall, I believe, that people will reject it and rise up against it. It's just a matter of time.
Thank you for that, David. That's certainly a challenging thought, that the people will actually rise up, and it certainly would be encouraging to see some more political activity from individuals in community. And I know that there were efforts in South Australia recently, the last month or so, a couple of demonstrations. One was the vaccine. I think that's almost weekly. I may be wrong, it may be fortnightly, whatever, but they're out there. And then there's also the full-term abortion issue that, of course, passed our parliament, which was just such a sad indictment of the elite class, that they would choose to actually do that. And very little word coming from the upholders of morality, which appear to be silent. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I wonder what we would think if our next door neighbor undertook to get a large debt and attribute responsibility for it to us. And isn't that essentially what government is doing now? We have conceded to them the right to undertake a debt, and because it's considered to be public debt, we all accept responsibility for it. Now, for a long time, we expected there to be some accountability for this and some recognition of responsibility, but now the limitations are all off, and the debt is being incurred at fantastic rates. And because it is still regarded as public debt for which we're all responsible, we should have questioned this long ago, I think, the mechanism whereby somebody else can put you into debt in this way, but we haven't. And now the plan obviously is to increase this debt and at some point foreclose, and we'll be left holding an empty bag, because we have not questioned the fundamentals of financial practice and economics in a responsible manner for forever. Now one would hope that people are waking up, but there is no mechanism, it seems, to bring these politicians under control so that their debt borrowing can be constrained. It's a real problem. We've accepted in economics all kinds of arbitrary definitions for decades. We have a definition, and these are arbitrary, and they are unreal. They're phony. The definition of inflation is phony. Indeed, if you look at economics studies at university, I remember back in my university days, the basic economics 101 text laid down the principle that economics is the study of scarce resources. So you can't have economics unless you have scarcity. Well, that's a strange starting point, isn't it? Why should you assume that there's scarcity? There might be abundance. And in fact, there's all kinds of evidence that there is abundance. So we are told that we go into a recession, for example. There's another definition that is completely arbitrary. I think the definition is that if you don't have economic growth over a period of 2 quarters of the year, you're in a recession. But what does this mean in real terms? I mean, it's a totally arbitrary thing, but it doesn't have any meaning in the real world. In fact, the only way you should evaluate whether we're in a recession, being interpreted as an inadequate growth of the economy, is to see whether or not our economy is delivering to the population its full predictive potential. But they never look at that. They've got these phony, concocted definitions that they've inculcated into the minds of certainly all economics students and the population in general through this media that we have now discovered is so absolutely corrupt. It's just a mind control mechanism. It's a psychological operation. So now we're in a situation where the debt is being forced into astronomical dimensions, and we should be realizing that the financial system has always been a trap waiting to spring or to be sprung. And I think that what we're seeing now with this unlimited acquisition of debt is the springing of the trap, and the population will have to deal with this because the crisis is at hand. And if we don't reject this principle that these politicians who no longer have any sense of accountability to their electorates at all can undertake indebting them without limit. We must absolutely act on this, or we're in very deep trouble.
Thank you for that, Robert. I noted the other week I got an email from a bloke, friend of mine, and he said that the seat in Parliament belongs to the electorate, and not the party system. And it was interesting because across the weekend there was an article that said when politicians leave the party because they've had enough of it, the corruption or whatever, that they should actually forego their seat and hand it back to the party so that the party can claim it back because it's the party's property. And I think that's very telling. It's very telling that the whole party system, the whole control of our government is through the regimentation of the party system. And of course, when you look at the issue of finance, you look at the issue of media, and you realise that, of course, that's how they control our parliament. It's the finance and media controls the party system, and then, of course, the party system controls our parliament, so the people have no say whatsoever. Your thoughts, please, Wallace Klinck.
Well, the media is the handmaiden of the banking system, of the financial system. In other words, the media acts as a justifier of what finance is doing. And they have such a monopoly over the news that they virtually control the entire attitude of society. At least they have been doing so. When things get bad enough, people tend to become restive. And then, of course, the media has to move into overtime to reinforce the supremacy of the financial system, which they do. You will never get the media as an institution taking a position that is critical of our financial system, because the purpose of that system is to seize and centralize control of policy. And being the handmaiden of the financial system, the mainstream media, as they call it, is simply going to supinely serve its masters. And that's the way it works. And unless the people themselves arise to the occasion, develop an understanding of what's been going on, and put forth alternatives, there's no way out of it. But the only way we can dig ourselves out of this is through realistic policy. Actually, to get a little bit technical, what's been happening is that as time passed, we have moved from a primitive economy where energy, the human energy, has played the major role in production, to a highly refined and sophisticated technological economy where actually human energy is not needed or used anything like it was in the past. Production is not, as Marx seemed to think, due to human labor that has been expropriated by the evil capitalist. That's a completely unrealistic conception of reality. The fact of the matter is that production has moved from the individual human being to more or less automated processes through automation and the substitution of human labor by technological forces, processes, and so on. So, but this has had serious implications with regard to accountancy and business. Business has to incur costs when it produces, and it has to recover those costs. And it can only recover those costs from some part of the consuming public. The consuming public has to have the means whereby to purchase the output of industry so that industry can make that recovery. And but the method of accountancy has also changed, and money being issued only as debt in combination with accountancy procedures means that the price of goods and services increasingly becomes independent of human effort and more due to non-human factors. And so therefore, you have to have some way of making sure that the public has sufficient income to buy enough of the to buy the product of industry so industry can in fact recover its costs. And anyone in business knows full well that you can't stay in business if you don't recover your costs. However, there's a trick that has been perpetrated, and that is to move the state into a position of filling the insufficiency of income that is paid out to as wages, salaries, and dividends to individuals. And of course, when the state takes over that function, the state takes over the power of mobilizing the forces, productive forces in society. And the state becomes dictator of these processes. So people who think that they're going to get by money that is being created by the governments in the form of debt are deceiving themselves, because in fact that is putting an obligation against the society as a whole for the future in order to pay these debts. And debts can only be paid by effort. As I said before, there's a rather strange anomaly in our economy whereby we are not allowed to claim what we produce unless we produce something else in order to generate the income, financial income, that is missing because of our current way of accounting and financing. So it's literally a form of perpetual slavery. We cannot grow a crop and eat it until we do something else, like building a tank or engaging in war or engaging in some gigantic state project that caters to powerful people by extending, large contracts and things like that, which may not be desired by the people or necessary at all. However, it is through a process of intense lobbying, powerful economic interests are able to compel governments to, or induce governments to engage in these projects, which are not necessarily a representative part of the national product in a meaningful sense. You can keep people working, spinning their wheels, doing nothing constructive, but keeping busy and getting paid for it. But that is not, by any rational standard, a measure of well-being for society. In fact, the more that it becomes attenuated and divorced from reality, the more so-called economic activity is actually a liability to the people, because it denies them the freedom, the leisure to engage in self-chosen activities. In other words, it enslaves the public. And so we're being, as the common parlance, I guess you'd say, we're being ripped off royally. And people do not understand that. They only understand that they get their income by working. And when they have to work harder and harder, and even though it may be in nice air-conditioned offices, their time and their energies are drawn upon increasingly by this process of having to pay for production that is not, for which not sufficient income is distributed in order for it to be bought. So this is a long project that's been going on now over the last century, particularly when there's been such a magnificent development of technology, which is great for productive capacity and efficiency. It has caused a greater and greater deficiency of financial purchasing power. And this situation we're facing today is a culmination of the process whereby the gap in income has gotten larger and larger, and it has been subsidized by debt, which is a charge against the future, which is not in any sense a liquidation of costs. It's just a transfer of costs to the future against the present. In other words, it is an incredible enslavement of the population. An enslavement which is so great that I think they are really incapable of conceptualizing it.
Yeah, redeeming the debt. That's exactly right. I see it as we're at that point of indebtedness where we are unable to redeem the debt. And
that's right, Arnie, and it has happened because of the very fact that technology has made human effort redundant.
Yeah, that's right. More and more so, the more advanced control robotics that you have, the less you have human engagement, and therefore the less that's paid out in wages. And of course, in Australia, the job keeper, job seeker subsidy to keep people some form of income to people during this lockstep, that comes to an end today. And I'd be keenly interested in your thoughts on this issue, David Smith.
I'm just thinking on those words of Wally's, we're being ripped off royally. You gave us the figures earlier, Arnie. Every man, woman and child in Australia owing $37,000 in debt. You've got to ask whether that debt is legitimate. Where does the buck stop? Who is responsible for that debt? Is it the people that do not understand what's going on? All they understand today is got to have a job. They're even willing to be injected with this untested cocktail rather than lose their job. Fear of losing the job is palpable all across the world. And you've got to ask, where's the legitimacy for this control and debt that's been imposed upon us? Until we can demand responsibility of our government for what they are doing, they are going to impose further and further totalitarian type controls over the people. And yes, that's where it's heading.
No worries. Thank you for that, David. I've got to actually correct myself in the numbers. The number is actually 31,744, and that came from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. That's for every man, woman and child in Australia. That's the current debt level, and of course that's gone up $11,700, which is more than 1/3. It's gone up since this government took office. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Yeah, actually, Arnie, that figure looks low to me. I thought it was a lot higher than that in Canada. And I think our dollars are more less equivalent in value. Anyway, that probably is only national debt, too.
Yeah,
There's
I
also some other government debt that isn't accounted for there.
Yeah.
And
personal debt as well, too, Robert. Not only
absolutely,
not only the provinces or states in Australia, but also personal debt, industrial debt. It's absolutely colossal. And of course, how are we supposed to work our way out of this? You know, when virtually the homes are telephone numbers and that sort of thing. Anyway, keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, well, this personal debt thing, what I'm astounded by is the fact that the house prices are going through the roof. We have all kinds of people losing their jobs. There's businesses shutting down and going bankrupt everywhere. And yet somehow house prices are still rising at tremendous speed. I think this must be some other kind of a trap. It certainly is a factor in personal debt that is growing exceedingly fast. So at some point, we're going to discover what is behind this phenomenon. And I don't think it could be natural, because in a time when the economy is in desperate straits, you shouldn't have prices rising like this, and you shouldn't have the stock markets going through the roof either. And yet this must be some kind of artificial pressure that's being put on there. Anyway, I do believe at some point the reason behind it will become apparent. You know, there used to be the idea, I think, not only in the United States, where it was explicitly stated by Abraham Lincoln, but in all our Western societies, that we have government by the people. But there's not even a pretense of that anymore. We have government that is transferring all its authority to international institutions. And there is absolutely no way that we can have any impact on these global organizations, because we have no organizational connection to them. We have no control over them at all. So this is the erection of an international dictatorship, and they cannot pretend it's anything else. We're not voting for the people who are running the international financial institutions or the World Health Organization or any of these organizations, most of which are plugged into the United Nations in some way. It's the end of any kind of popular control over politics. And yet the media, the media that is betraying us so scandalously right now, continues to present the options we have as being between parties within a national context. But this is not the way politics is playing out now at all. The media says, for one thing, in Canada at least, all the major parties are united in saying that no member will be tolerated if they don't go along with certain precepts. And basically the precepts are political correctness. We've had people kicked out of all the major parties because they made some little statement that suggested they might not be 100% behind the program of internationalism and of this political correctness, which is a concept that derives from Marxism. I mean, there's no doubt of that. Historically, that can be established. So basically what we have now is a Marxist monopoly of politics, because all the parties are going along with this program that has been evolved over time. And it's an interesting phenomenon, because in Canada, at least, we have a provincial premier, Rob Ford, in Ontario, and he opened a kind of window to what might be going on behind the scenes. Because last week he said, if a politician resists the instructions of a public health authority, and these are his, it's a paraphrase, but it's his words, he might as well tie a noose around his neck and jump off a bridge. So is this what explains why all these politicians have lined up and there is absolutely no questioning of the overall scenario that's being presented? No resistance whatsoever. It's an astonishing thing. Normally in politics, different parties across the country, they are resisting each other. They're putting obstacles in each other's way. But with regard to this COVID thing, it's just full steam ahead. Very interesting phenomenon, and you really wonder what kind of coercion is being applied to these politicians. Are they really being told that they have to put a noose around their head and jump off a bridge? It's actually quite a frightening prospect, because and it makes you actually sympathize with them in a way, because you don't know what they're being told will be the consequences if they resist the program. So the result of this is that we have these so-called experts, and generally speaking, these public medical officers are really mediocre experts. They might have the title doctor in their name, but they don't have qualifications in research or laboratory study or anything like that. In fact, they've been practitioners of public health, which is largely PR, and yet they are the ones who are transmitting these instructions to us of what we must do in the face of this alleged virus. So what it is the elevation of so-called experts into positions of total control over society. And anybody who can imagine that that is compatible with any concept of democracy seems to me to be extremely simple-minded.
Yeah, thank you for that, Robert. I made a point through the On Targets of actually documenting some of the backgrounds to our chief medical advisors, and of course they were heavily influenced by the World Health Organization. They were actually part of teams which were going through scenarios of having pandemics, of having lockdowns, of computer model projections and things like that. So they were actually trained and developed in this area of expertise, not medical at all. And the other was that, and it's actually slipped me, so I'll keep going. Wally, I'll give you the floor.
I think if we're going to reduce it to its essentials, people must understand that this so-called viral crisis is a mechanism of enforcing compliance. That's what it's all about. It's a political thing primarily, and it has been branded as such by some certain medical people. It's quite obviously a political thing. And if we're going to allow ourselves to be bullied into all sorts of social norms and practices which are completely alien and foreign to the whole of human existence, we're going to pay a heavy price for it. And what we, as somebody said, we have nothing to fear but fear. Not one of my favorite politicians, but it's true, because there are people in this world who understand the human psyche quite well. They understand how fear and guilt can be exploited in order to acquire or to cause human compliance with certain policies which are given very wide coverage in the controlled media and control the public mind. And it's like a con man exploiting a naive soul. And the people are really quite naive, although more and more of them are beginning to perceive that something is definitely not right. And quite a few of them are beginning to look dangerously close at the source of the problem. So I would say that, well, the forces of tyranny have the upper hand now and are playing that hand very strongly, because I think they know that if they don't, they will lose it. In fact, some of them have said we must act now because we might never get another chance to impose tyranny or compliant behavior on the part of the public. The party system is really not compatible with a free society. The idea of the representative of the people was that the representative represented a specific clientele, or I should say a certain segment of the population, and that with his or her communication with that public, policy would be most beneficially determined. Whereas, of course, now policy is determined by occult forces, which are determined that they will control society for their own edification and power, primarily. And the locus of power has been removed from the individual concerning his ability or her ability to determine the nature of life. And it's difficult to convince some people that we live in a tyranny, because it is not, it's difficult to really pinpoint the source of the tyranny. And so it remains sort of vague, but increasingly domineering. And so really, as we've seen lately, the party system is just a sham. If people get into the party on the basis of presenting a program, which people are inclined to say, well, it doesn't sound too bad, we'll vote for him. He or she gets into the party and finds out very quickly that they have no defining power whatsoever. The power will come through the leadership from, as I said, occult sources. And it's a one-way street to tyranny. So the party system, because it is a focus, it's an institution of power, becomes immediately the focus of the attack, the focus of attack for those people who remain in dark shadows and are trying to attempt to force their will upon the rest of society. And it's been a thing that has just grown and grown over time and become more and more malicious and damaging as time has passed, because it has led to the increased centralization of power and policy. People should be, I mean, our approach to government has historically been the less government, the better. In other words, only a sufficient government to handle things which are absolutely essential, so that individuals can choose themselves the course and nature of their lives. But the more that becomes removed from the individual, the more the individual is subject to tyrannical edicts and power, and the quality of life simply declines. And of course, that serves a revolutionary purpose, because it generates hostility in society. And people tend to blame someone who seems to have been a little bit successful within the mess. And they become resentful of anyone who seemingly succeeds, because they feel something is being wrongly done. And then the communists come along and say it's because of these producers. They're stealing your wages by paying you an unfair wage for what service you're rendering. And that's not the problem. The problem is that business does not and cannot, under the existing regulations or conventions, pay the community sufficient money for the community to come back and purchase what industry produces. And so therefore, society, both privately and publicly, is forced more and more to resort upon financial debt, which originates with banks, which create money out of nothing, and in so doing, put a lien on society, and literally they actually appropriate the communal capital, because they will foreclose on that if you don't pay them. And they operate a system that ensures that you will not pay it. And we see now the really fantastic degree to which society is being driven to try and subsist within the context of the existing system. We're being our inheritance of productivity, technology, which should lead to a very leisured and abundant life, has been stolen from us.
Yeah.
And it's being done largely through Puritan doctrination, which says that anyone who doesn't work much and work hard is not a responsible person. Yeah. That's not really the way humanity was created within the context of natural law.
No. Yeah, no, thank you for that, Wally. That's particularly well put, and I know it takes a while to work through your thoughts, but it's very important that we do consider them. That, yes, the Puritan work ethic, you shall not, if you do not work, you shall not eat, and yet here we've got robotics, advanced control, and everything like that, and yet we still say that we can't actually give a share to someone, and it is so wrong. And of course the compounding debt on top of that, where it becomes irredeemable, the public debt, the private debt, the industrial debt, it's to the point where if the machines are doing all the work, we have no chance of actually getting out of debt. Your thoughts, please, David Smith.
Well, it's very obvious, isn't it? The control of all mankind is the agenda at the present time. But within every human heart, mind, there's that desire for freedom. Freedom of bodily function, freedom of spirit to choose or refuse. And it's interesting to note that those demanding all sorts of abnormal things are free to demand all that. But freedom from government control is not on the agenda, it seems. We've got to submit when it comes to that. Christ taught us to pray that his will, thy will, be done on earth as it is in heaven. Did he expect us to pray that in a vacuum, or is that the reality that we've missed? I think it is the reality, and there's a great hope that humans will reject this control and seek the reality that of the abundance that this world is. And yeah, I just don't know where to go with that from there. But I do see the human being as that we must reject control or live as slaves, and that's not an option for most of us, I'm sure.
Yeah, that's exactly right, David. I agree that there's an inherent desire in each one of us to find expression and creativity, and to, if you like, let our spirits soar. And we look at the beautiful world that is around us, and yet if we listen to the media, the situation, you would think that the sky was falling, and in actual fact it's not. Your thoughts, please, Robert Klinck.
Yeah, well, we've assumed for a long time that people were basically capable of independence of thought and rationality. Unfortunately, this COVID crisis, so-called, has thrown that largely into doubt. We've assumed that there's a desire in mankind for freedom. And I think that ultimately that will be expressed. But the media have got us concentrating on all kinds of side issues. And therefore they have assumed a kind of ownership of the thought processes of a very large proportion of the population. To see what people are not only complying with, but going beyond even the demands of the people who are dictating the measures that must be taken against this COVID is really an astonishing revelation. Who would have thought that people would be so compliant, and that they would actually, in many cases, seem to want to shed their freedoms, to abandon their freedoms, rather than to make sure that despite what government might be saying, and government might even have legitimate concerns, at all times their freedom would be protected. But there's so many people who've just abandoned the thought. It's really disconcerting. Anyway, if you can control thought, then you can control people. And it's obvious that the measure of control that the media have acquired over people's thinking is, in many cases, almost absolute. So, fortunately, there are many contradictions in what's being said. A glaring example is this AstraZeneca vaccine. You know, in France, about a month ago, they were saying they discovered that it shouldn't be given to anybody over the age of 55. Well, last week, the new judgment was that it shouldn't be given to anybody under 55. So it just shows how absolutely at sea the people who are directing these COVID instructions are. They don't have a clue what they're doing. All you have to do is compare what they were saying last month with what they're saying this month, and you'll see that none of it coheres. None of it makes any sense. So, unfortunately, people seem to have very short memories, and they don't have developed critical thinking. So all we can hope for really is that some of these incompatibilities and inconsistencies will become visible enough that a resistance to this arbitrary withdrawal of their freedoms will be questioned and will be resisted more and more. And I think the task of people who are aware of how the COVID program makes absolutely no sense and has been full of contradictory instructions from the beginning, have a job of awakening their neighbors. We don't need a new political party. Political parties are subject to sabotage and to take over at the center. What we need is a growth of public opinion that becomes so substantial that it impacts on policy. And that really is the only way out for us in the predicament we've been placed in. You know, there was a meeting of 24 heads of state last week, and they all agreed that they needed to set up a more rigorous organization to anticipate future pandemics. Well, when did this preoccupation with pandemics become so great? Nobody was talking about pandemics 14 months ago. It was not in the scope of people's thinking at all. But now, this organization at the international level is being made on the basis that there are going to be a succession of pandemics. Well, this is patently just a pretext for introducing more and more controls at the international level. And if those controls are installed, then you can forget about any kind of popular control over policy in the future, because the internationalists have come up with the perfect excuse and pretext for stripping people of the means of exerting any control over politics.
Thank you for that, Robert. That's certainly a very, very vivid points that are there. I'm just going to cut across, before I call for closing comments, I'm going to cut across to our main website and just highlight to ladies and gentlemen that we've got a search facility here on the left, but we've also got the Social Credit Library and the Actionist Corner. There is so much information that's there. If you go to the Actionist Corner and you just navigate here to the on-target archives, and you'll be able to go down to volume 37, which we've done, this is this year's work, and go back over the archives without a problem. So just let's reverse that again. We go from home, we go to the Actionist Corner and the On Target Archives. And there's a wealth in all of these libraries, but in particular the archives. And you can actually follow the narrative through. All of last year, it's all recorded there. And you can go through those archives and actually have a read and have a consider what was actually said at the time of the imposition of COVID. Lockdown, lockstep, lockdown. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Wallace.
Arnie, people have to understand the first motivation in life is to preserve life. It's the law of self-preservation. And obviously, it's absolutely essential because if you're not here, the whole thing is academic anyway. So, you know, the Political and Economic Planning Organization in Britain, which was an offshoot of the Fabian Socialist London School of Economics, observed that in times of crisis, only in times of crisis, is it easy to manipulate society into accepting certain policies. In other words, if you want to impose policies, you create a crisis. And that, of course, is a pretty understandable position. I mean, people are not going to simply hand over their life knowingly and willingly because somebody comes along and says, you must do this, you must do that. So we have to understand that we as a species are subject to, we don't know everything, and we're subject to confusion. We're subject to the input of people who wish to confuse the situation and prevent us from even attempting to understand the actual and real nature of certain circumstances. And therefore, we have this situation where a lot of people are being stampeded into doing all sorts of the most ridiculous and unscientific, unsound things with respect to this alleged viral epidemic. And there are a lot of very strange things about this. In the first place, the testing procedure has been condemned by its very inventor as being unsuitable for this type of analysis or detection. And he died at a rather surprisingly young age after speaking out on this. It seems that this so-called virus is something that exists in fragments, and it is not, in the true sense, a virus. Also, it appears that, according to some scientific opinion, the attempts to design or fabricate these so-called vaccines is fraudulent in itself because it's not really a vaccine that they're doing. They're doing a form of genetic engineering, which makes it possible to literally alter the nature of human cells and change what they call a human genome or kind. In other words, has the potential to literally alter the nature of human beings as organisms. And you couldn't imagine anything more. Talk about playing God and anything more dangerous, more hazardous than that, because people don't know what they're doing. And we see now in Britain, there is a pretty extensive report came out with two of the major providers of so-called vaccine, which has indicated an increasingly high level of injuries and fatalities. and as a matter of fact, in many thousands. So that people should be, just because of them stampeding in fear, because somebody says they're in danger, people falling into compliance with some of these outrageous policies is it's irrational. It doesn't make any rational sense, but people are not always rational, and people are often stampeded by fear. And people who stampede people by fear often have a very definite motivation, a vested interest. So it's not any surprise, I suppose, that more and more people are becoming extremely leery of these vaccines. So they should, because they're very survival. Perhaps even the survival of mankind may depend on a reluctance to fall for this policy.
Thank you for that, Wally. Very well put and an excellent summary. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, David Smith.
I think Wally's done a pretty good job there. It's all about control through fear, and I think Robert said it too. Every time you watch our public officials speak on this, they show the farce of the whole thing. And you don't have to watch Mr. Bill Gates very often to see the diabolical hand of satanical influence directed over him. I think it's enslavement of all mankind. I remain full of hope because people are seeing the same farce as we're seeing, and there is far more pushback to all of this than is ever allowed to sneak through on the media. Last weekend there was to be rallies for freedom from the forced vaccination and other issues all over. These rallies were to be held right through every capital city in Australia. There was not one mention of it that I saw on media. And this just points out the total control of that situation, and people are waking up to it. I see hope in all of this.
Thank you so much, David Smith. That's an encouraging summary. Your thoughts and closing comments, please, Robert Klinck.
Well, I agree with David. I'm not completely discouraged. I think the situation looks very desperate, but the folly of the measures to control this virus is also becoming more and more apparent. And as someone has said, once you become aware of this, you don't go back to sleep. It stays with your consciousness. So every person who is made aware of the underlying perception about this COVID thing will remain suspicious of it and becomes a potential ally in fighting it off. If they're going to make the injection of a vaccine a precondition of employment, the effects on society are going to be really disastrous, because the people who have independence of mind, the ones who are the most beneficial in any kind of activity are the ones who are going to not be employable. And so your level of competence in all areas is going to go down. You're going to have a bunch of unthinking, compliant people trying to perform the functions of society. And that is not going to be a successful experiment. Governments in the past have had the function of breaking up monopolies. But right now, all Western governments, and probably all governments everywhere, are actively promoting the growth of monopolies at the international level. So they are betraying one of the basic functions that they've had in the past. They're abandoning their responsibility to prevent monopolies with antisocial implications from developing in society. It seems as if the monopolies have got into a position of controlling government so thoroughly that they can more or less get away with anything they want. Well, this is because a few people have been able to amass vast fortunes on the level of national economies practically, and they have not resisted the temptation to use these fortunes for the aggrandizement of their power. Well, there's a function in government to prevent this from happening. And it's only because the control of government policy by the populace has been so completely undermined that this function is not being insisted upon by the people, that the government step in to make sure that a few individuals who have aspirations to function virtually on a godlike level are not allowed to get away with it. It's the concentration of money power that has led to this monopoly. And the antidote for it is to decentralize financial power. Now, how you can go about this is the key question that faces us. And social credit provides the answer. Money is an amazing thing. And while it has the power to concentrate, it has the ability to concentrate power, it also has the ability to decentralize it. All we have to do is find the mechanisms whereby to do that. And mechanisms proposed by Major Clifford Hugh Douglas a century ago are as valid today as they ever were. And the intention was to establish every individual in a position of economic security and independence. There might have been a time when this was not feasible, but it's more than feasible now with the development of economic abundance. And we just have to find the means of distributing that abundance. And that's where we should be concentrating, focusing our attention, and demanding changes in financial policy that will prevent these super rich individuals from hijacking the government authority, which they've done. And they're using it to suck the power out of the concept of democracy. Democracy at the present time is dead, and it doesn't seem to have very many defenders. Democracy in the sense of the population having control over policy. That is what is needed, and we need the mechanisms to do it. And the way to do it is to decentralize monetary power. Otherwise, we're going in exactly the opposite direction, and things are going to get worse rather than better.
Thank you for that, Robert. Excellent summary. In this coming week's On Target, which will be up, it will be up actually once you're watching this video, you'll see that Eric Butler talks about, I think it's Quadrasino Animo or something. It was one of the encyclicals by the Pope, and it deals with this devolution, the actual decentralizing of power, and if it can be done by a lower authority, it should be done by a lower authority. If it can be done by an individual, then it must be done by the individual. You're actually denying the individual an opportunity to be responsible. And so this is really it's essentially taking the personality out of the whole equation, the personality of the individual, and of course individuals working together. Very interesting forum. Happy Easter to those that see this before the Easter. I doubt that they will. This will actually broadcast after Easter. I hope you had a pleasant Easter, and thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us today. I really value your input.
Well, we have a
Ernie.
very serious problem on our hands, and it's going to have to be done with. I think it will probably be done with by the outworking of natural law, without which it cannot be resolved. And if we can get ourselves back on the course where we are actually attuned to natural law, things will come out the way they should come out in the nature of things.
Thank you for that last word of encouragement. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll catch all you gentlemen, if you've got time, again next week. Thank you.